Hello and welcome back. All right, so far up to this point in this section and other sections, we've been doing a lot of preferences and non-fun stuff. So I thought we would do something a little different this time and have a little fun by editing an actual image. So if you want to follow along with this particular lesson, go ahead and grab this image, which is image number 001 in your resources folder. And you also want to make sure you have access to the original raw file of this image as well, which will have an extension of NEF because we're going to use both of those images. Now, if we take a look at this image, it appears to be more blue than I would personally prefer, because I do prefer warmer images versus bluer images. And on a warm, sunny day like this, blue doesn't really represent the scene at the time I capture this. A warm color would better represent the mood and the feeling of this image versus blue, so we're going to go ahead and fix that. So for this particular edit, we are going to use Photoshop's color balance tool by going up to Image, Adjustments, and then selecting Color Balance, and the keyboard shortcut for that is Command or Control and the letter B. And now we have our color balance tool selected to make our adjustments. So you can either make your adjustments via the sliders here, or you can type in numbers in one of these three boxes. So we have cyan to red, magenta to green, yellow to blue. Then just under these sliders, we have different tone balance options: shadows, midtones, and highlights. And this will allow us to fix the colors in those dynamic ranges of the image, whether it's the shadows, the midtones, or the highlights. You can also preserve the luminosity, which is the brightness of your particular image. So the benefit to applying your edits via a tone balance is you could keep your color cast in the shadows, but remove it in the highlights, because sometimes in the shadows, the color is much cooler anyways versus the highlights. So that gives you more creative control over how you color correct your images and stay true to the colors that you saw when you captured the image. So for this lesson and this particular edit, we're just going to stick with midtones for now. And then once you make your adjustments, if you decide you want to change them, you can go ahead and select shadows or highlights and do other adjustments as needed. So let's go ahead and add yellow to the overall midtones of the image in order to remove some of that blue. If you go too far, then you're going to introduce more yellow, but it also tends to turn the image more green as well. So you don't want to go too far. I'm going to go about -10 or -13, actually, right about there. And actually, I find it still a little bit too blue for me. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the redness of the midtones in order to warm it up just a little bit more. And we can also take a look at it before and after to get a better idea of how much we've actually edited the image. And I think thus far it's a lot better than it was before. So it's just a balancing act, no pun intended, to make your adjustments on these three sliders in order to get the image to look the way you want it and to balance out the colors. But what if there was a quicker way to edit your images and to remove these types of color casts? Well, there is if a particular photo's colors are a result of a color cast. So a color cast occurs when applying a Kelvin temperature that is not properly set up in camera for the scene you're capturing. Now, as you know, I'm a big proponent of starting my editing in camera. The more you get right in camera, the less editing you'll have to do in Photoshop. So my first recommendation is to nail the white balance in camera so you don't have to worry about fixing it in Photoshop. So that's one example of editing your images much quicker. Get it right in camera. Now the other is if you're shooting raw images and let's say you're unable to capture the white balance at the time of capture for whatever reason, you don't have time to make the correct selections, you're not sure what settings to use, or maybe something else is prohibiting you from capturing it in camera properly, then when you go into ACR with that raw file, I'm going to go ahead and open up the NEF file here and open it up in ACR. So now we're in ACR, and with one click, I can fix this blue color cast. And right now we can see the white balance is set to as shot. Well, if I go in and select daylight, boom, it's now warmed up the image based on the color temperature of this particular profile. So these probably look familiar to you because most cameras have these types of white balance settings in camera to allow you to capture the proper white balance in camera as you take the photo. But like I said, if you get it wrong, you can always come in and choose something else with one click and warm it up the way you want it. And then you can also fine tune that particular profile. Once you select it, maybe it's not warm enough for you, so you can just come in with the temperature and increase the warmth of the overall image with your temp and tint sliders. All right, let's go back to our JPEG image, and we are going to go back to history, and I want to make sure that I have this reset back to the original image and the color cast from the original image, because I want to show you another way to remove this color cast with a JPEG file if you're not going to do it in ACR. So we're going to go up to Image, Adjustments, and Levels. So go ahead and select that. And from here, I'm going to show you how to do your white balance color corrections with one click from this tool as well. So from here, you can select to edit the RGB channels, all three red, green, and blue channels, or you can choose one of the three color channels individually to adjust or edit just that particular color channel. So we can adjust just the blue channel if we want to fix the color cast because it is too blue, and we can make adjustments with this adjustment right here. But that's not what we're going to do. So let's go back to RGB, and what we're going to do is we're going to use one of these eyedropper tools from this section right here. So we have this one sets our black point, this one sets a gray point, and this one sets a white point. So the one we want is the gray point, because what we want to do with this particular tool is we want to click on an area of the image that should be neutral gray. And when you do that, that should remove the color cast. So it's just a matter of going across the image to locate an area that should be neutral gray, which could be either the water or the stones or maybe another part of the image. But I think the stones in this area should be a neutral gray. We could say the white should be neutral as well, but we can see that the blue is much deeper here versus the rocks, and if we go here, it's going to be too warm. So I'm going to choose this area right here. I'm just going to click, and with one click, we have removed that blue color cast from the image. Now, if we come over here, I just want to show you, if we click on the water, it's going to be much warmer. So the goal is to try and find that neutral gray without going too much on the other side of the warmth of a particular image. So I'm just using Command or Control and the letter Z to undo that. So I can just keep clicking in different areas until I find a color that I'm happy with, but I prefer this area right here to remove that blue color cast, and I find that the image is much more balanced now than previously. We still have some blue in the shadows and in the water, but that's to be expected because this area is typically much cooler versus area that are getting direct sunlight. So you have a couple of different options to remove color casts in your images. You can use color balance, you can use levels, you can use ACR if you're shooting raw images, even JPEG images. You don't have to use just raw files in ACR. The only problem is if you open this JPEG file in ACR, you're not going to have all the white balance options that you do with the raw file, and that's because this information has not been recorded as part of the JPEG file versus what you get with your NEF file or your CR2 files or whatever your camera format is. The raw files are going to record all the different white balance options available, whereas JPEG files will not. It's actually compressing the file when it saves it, and it's discarding all that information, so you can't go back and make those one-click adjustments. And that's another reason why I prefer shooting raw files versus JPEG files, but we're going to talk more about that in an upcoming lesson. So all those different options we went over in this lesson to fix your color will work. You just need to decide which one is best for your personal workflow. Now I'm going to go ahead and go back to my JPEG file here again because I want to explain one other thing, and it's a huge, gigantic problem that we created for ourselves, and that's the fact that the adjustments we made were destructive. So I'm going to go back up and add a levels adjustment again because I did undo that previously. And if I click OK, and if I save this image and then I close the image and then I come back tomorrow or next week or next year and I decide, you know what, I do not like that color edit that I did. I need to redo that. Well, guess what? You have to start from this point of the image. You can't go back to the original because you worked destructively. You effectively changed the pixels, and when you save it and exit, those changes are permanent. So if you make a mistake, you cannot undo them. You can continue editing this image, but the more you edit and save destructively, the more you degrade the image. Now, the way I prefer to work and the way I recommend working is to use adjustment layers versus non-adjustment layers because they are non-destructive. So for example, if I come up here to layer and select new adjustment layer, we can see we have levels here as well. I'm going to go ahead and click OK to get started. And then I can make my adjustment with my eyedropper tool. So I'm just going to come over here, click. And if we go to layers, we can see we have a new layer option here. So if I save this image and I come back tomorrow and I open it up and I saved it as a PSD file, then I can click on this levels adjustment layer and readjust my edits accordingly. And then I can save it again and come back next year and I can still come back in here and make adjustments again. So this is how you work non-destructively. So the way I've showed you how to edit this particular image is not the way I recommend. I recommend working non-destructively with adjustment layers, and we're going to go into more detail about how to use these and why you should use these in more detail in an upcoming section and lessons. Until then, let's go ahead and move on to the next lesson, which is going to be all about adding color tints.